What's Your Work Fit is sponsored by Hudson Davis. Start your brand's marketing and communications journey today at hudsondaviscommunications.com. I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin here. Welcome to everybody across North America and around the world. I'm so pleased that you are joining us today here on What's Your Work Fit. We're going to get to our guest and our topic shortly, but a little bit of shameless self-promotion. If you submit a question that we make a main topic on a future What's Your Work Fit live show, we will send you this What's Your Work Fit embroidered cap. It's our way of saying thanks. If you have a topic in mind that's keeping you up at night about the work that you do and want to do, about the workplace that you do it, do me a favor, please send it to me at dan@dansmolin.com. And again, if we select it, we will send you the cap and then make it the topic of a future live show, and we will credit you with the fabulous question. Okay, let's get to it. I am so pleased to bring onto the show today Simon Darcy. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Good to be here. I'm well, Dan. Thank you.
So I'm going to do a little introduction of Simon. He is a partner at Evolution, where he works with leaders of fast-growing startups and high-growth companies that strive to be iconic, world-enriching entities. He is an executive coach, consultant, and leadership mentor with over 20 years of experience assisting leaders and companies on 6 continents. And along with Todd Emaus, he authored Scale Without Losing Your Soul, the Startup Culture Guide. And as you can see that in his title on the screen, he's got the title right there so you can all look it up. How you doing, Simon? Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Doing well. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Okay, let's get to the question of the day, which was posed by Connor. Hey, Connor, thanks for submitting the question. So let's tee it up. He's launched a sustainable fashion startup on the West Coast, which he expects to be operational within the next 9 to 12 months. We're wishing you the best, Connor. In every startup that Connor's been a part of in the past, he laments that the stress level of the workplace was extreme. And it got to the point quite early in the process that he says we had to make believe we were all having fun chasing the founder's dream. Now that Connor is the founder, he hopes to build a more compassionate talent experience for everyone joining up to get the brand off the ground and cash flow positive. And Connor asked the question, how do I make my startup human friendly? So Simon, address Connor's question. How does he make his startup human friendly?
Yeah, that question actually, I think, is a question a lot of people in Connor's similar position have. And I think the shortest answer is, even though it's hard and you don't know when you're going to possibly find the time to do the work, don't wait to invest in building out the foundation of a good culture. And this is kind of in the book, there's a section called The Founder's Culture Building Dilemma, which is basically, you're struggling for survival. You're working hard to just make the metrics you need to get your next raise, to have a little more runway to survive. You're already pulling really long days, as are your early team members. And so you literally I don't have the time. And that cycle continues until a certain stage later in the future, let's say post B fundraise or C fundraise. And now we have 100 people or 150 people, or we're hiring our first maybe person that's going to be in charge of, people operations or culture. And by then it's almost too late, because we've set in motion a whole culture around a certain kind of grind that has so many kind of bad habits infused in it, that we're playing catch up. We have culture debt. And so my advice for how you make it. Yeah.
Culture debt? What is that?
Culture debt. Culture debt.
Oh, debt.
Yeah. We have default culture debt.
Wow.
We've brought on board, it looks a number of ways, right? It could look like, let me just go back to, I'm working with a really early stage founder. They're just proving the product market fit. They're in the health tech space. It's got a CMO on board, just hired their first head of tech and engineering. They've got a contract operations person. So they're just a small team, 4 or 5 people, 1 investor. And we're in early stage conversations about even now that you have your first 4 or 5 people, it's time to have a conversation where we spend a couple hours and just go what kind of culture are you creating here? How do you want to work with each other? What kind of people, when you invite other people to join your company, what are the kind of ways of working together that you want to sort for? And you start that now. And that also includes diversity of your team. Another form of culture debt, called default culture debt, is when you get to be, and this is a common story up at Silicon Valley, is you get to be 150, you're at your company, and your entire leadership team is white men under 40. It looks like a frat club. And it's going to be a lot harder to hire, leaders that are diverse and that and women and all sorts of people, if you are a boys club. And so you start early in that, and then that attracts and creates a kind of a nice virtuous cycle where you start from the very beginning that way. So that's the short, long answer of how you do it. But early on, you define what are some of the, let's say 3 or 4 key values / behaviors we want to prioritize. And let's really get real about that. And then do check-ins around that in our meetings. One of the big mistakes founders make is they think culture is separate from the work. There's, it's actually happening all the time. How we deal with this issue, how we deal with this debate, how we deal with this breakdown is our culture, and we want to make room for it.
I want to draw it back to a comment that Jeff made. He says, VC wants investments to scale fast into IPO so that they can cash out fast and profitably and move on. And does creating a human-friendly startup culture play against those high-velocity VC purposes? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. There's 2 ways to answer this question. I think, is it possible to scale a company if you have the right business model and product market fit and you're differentiated enough, and to ignore the people thing and get an exit that's successful? Yeah, it's possible to do that. I think it's going to be it's going to burn people out. Not many people would want to go through that again. And a very certain few are going to benefit from that. And most of them not the employees after maybe 20, right? But I think there's another case to be made that paying attention to the culture and the people things earlier actually creates the kind of company people want to work for. And, since Glassdoor kind of really changed the game back in whenever they did, 15 years ago, I remember all these companies all these best place to work, engagement surveys, and some of them were run by like a local paper, and you'd be doing out, and then you get like some free advertising. I'm the best place to work in Denver, or I'm the best mid-sized company, and then along came Glassdoor, and they really changed the game, because now people who said they were the best place to work for 3 years in a row had Glassdoor ratings that were like under 4. And you're like, okay, so that's not what your people say,
right?
What gives. And so since then, there's been, I think, a more honest effort and honest competition for creating places that actually value humans and balance that out. And you're not going to get the best and the brightest to stay very long, or to even come and give you a look, if you're not paying attention to this now. That's my belief.
So I wanted to bring in this comment from Katie, which is I found hilarious. She says, I'm on the culture committee for the founder, and he snidely calls it Culture Club, and I'm left to wonder of him, do you really want to hurt me? Which I thought was very funny. But she's got kind of a point there in that it seems like he's not taking it seriously, and especially in this age of Glassdoor and transparency, you really got to take this seriously along the continuum of the company's scale up, right?
Well, of course. Yeah. Do you have a question more about me? Yeah, I mean, of course, you're going to take this seriously. Do you have another question about that?
So I want to get into culture, and she's on a committee, and so I didn't get the full story from Katie, but I'm getting the sense of that she was put on this committee, that somebody valued her opinion, and maybe it was somebody who's a de facto chief people officer in the company. I don't know. That person takes it seriously, but in the C-suite, that top person is not taking it fully seriously, or maybe not fully appreciating what you describe as the company's essence and how to create that, and what you and Todd called the culture code. I'm wondering if you can flesh out some of those value propositions for our audience.
Sure. I think I'll first say that before I get into essence and culture code, there was I remember listening to a podcast by one of the McKinsey founders a while back, and they talked about like where they saw a big differentiation in like results and performance amongst all the studies that they do. And they found that the ones that made the biggest difference is where they were able to integrate the like operational focus, metrics, OKR pursuit, performance, with people empowerment, creating a culture that people will grow in, and that the companies that did that the best were the ones that actually brought multiples on their investment. And for example, they would have, it's cliche to have the person that runs HR or your people function to be in charge of culture.
Right.
And that's like, for us, that's like the kid, that's when we not, there are lots of really good, strong leaders there, but in a lot of companies, historically, they don't have the full support of the senior leadership team, of the CEO around culture efforts. It's like a second fiddle sort of situation. So we're always looking to have non-people leaders be very much out in front leading culture efforts. Because if it's just the people leader, that's I think a setup to have it just get relegated beyond, because culture needs to be infused everywhere. So just to comment on that part, one of the companies that I interviewed when I was doing the research for the book was Etsy. And the woman in charge of the quote values and impact team there back in 2014, 2015, 2016, Katie Hunt Moore, she talked about what they did at Etsy early on is they created this values and impact team, which was a team that had a leader from every function across the company. And their job was to like really take a look at and meet kind of like monthly and take a look at where are we like living the values that we say are important to us. So this is after the essence and the culture code have been created. And where are we not? And what can we do about it? And then they would make recommendations straight up to the leadership team, and they would then get, act on those recommendations. And it was like a privilege to be part of this team because they were part in a company where they cared about it. And so people got to like do something that felt really meaningful, that changed the environment that people worked in a very visible way. So that was like a story just to answer kind of the prompt you gave. I think going back to like really step one in scaling without losing your soul, or creating a culture that feels like it's something that becomes like a people attractor and retainer, starts with like, who are we at our essence? And so what we usually do is we go into like, I'm actually being invited to do this now with a client where they had some values on their website that they started when they first began, but they really didn't mean a lot to many people. They were just kind of slapped up there, and it's part of their brand, and it's fine. A lot of companies have values or posters on the wall, and they're not really a living thing. And so what we're interested in now at their particular stage, they're about 600-700 people, is like, who are you when you're already at your best? Like, or take the company name, like, what is it to be, like we did this with Tile early on, like way early on in 2015, 16, when Tile, the little like tracker thing became a thing. They really invested in their culture. They just finished their B round, which is actually a really good time to do this work, is because you've got enough wind at your backs, you've got a product market fit, and now you have like, you just closed your B round and you have a little bit of runway. You have like a few months, 4 or 5 months before the pressure for the next round comes. And you can kind of do a deep dive. And we did a whole thing where the whole company closed down for a day. And we did a whole workshop where we did focus groups for the whole company. And the questions we were asking are, when you're at your best, who are you? How are you working with each other? What is it? What are some iconic stories about like Tile when you're at your best? Like who are somebody in the company that you feel like really represents what you're about here? What makes Tile different from the other places you've worked? And so we're asking all these questions in like focus group format, and then we're taking all that data, and then there's these certain keywords and phrases that keep kind of showing up that are part of the kind of the origin story of the company. And out of that, we bucket that and create a summary of themes, and then we work with a leadership team and a small working group. And then from that comes the culture code. That eventually is like this published document that's a living document that has lots of different things. I can talk about that next, but I'll pause here just to give you a chance to, ask questions or
I wanted to ask about Etsy. I'm fascinated by the company, not just because it's Etsy, which I find it a remarkable company, but also because my wife and I are shop owners on Etsy. If you point to my wife's company's URL, it lands on her Etsy page. We consider it prestigious to be on Etsy.
Yeah.
So the question that I have has to do with you work with a client like Etsy, you help them buy into their culture code. It's a dynamic process. Things are going along really, really well, and then some headwind in the economy happens, like what happened this past year, that impacts their vendors, their shop owners, who all of a sudden aren't making what they used to make. How do those external forces that are oftentimes like acts of God impact the ongoing creation and nuancing of the culture code in a company?
Yeah, no, I really like that. Just to clarify, I didn't, Etsy was not one of my clients, but I interviewed a leader at Etsy as part of the research I did for the book.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify that, but I think it's a really good question because, particularly in the like 2009, 10 through, let's say 2021, right? That we had that 10 or 11 year stretch where interest rates were at historic lows.
Zero.
Money was just being printed and spread out. Everybody, it was just like, there was a huge amount of growth curves. Everybody was like making big bets, and a lot of them weren't based on past performance. They were based on like hopes for multiples, and there was just a lot of investment. Everybody was hiring. Nobody, and then it changed. And I think it's really easy for like strong economic times to like cover over poor or mediocre culture. It's easy to like get along when things are going well. It's much harder. You really get to test a culture when things are hard, when there's things out of our control that are happening. And I think that's happening now. Like I know that a number of our clients are having to like lay off a certain amount of people in order to like get there because the business is down, and how they do that. And I even just to put a hat tip to Glassdoor, you know, they just went through a round of that 10-15% they had to drop, but there was a way in which they did that. There was a way in which they communicated that. There was a way in which they supported and offered support for every single person they let go to help them find their next thing, and, you know, write letters. And I saw posts saying, hey, if you haven't, you know, if you got let go, because you can't really talk about who got let go to others. So they were doing their best to informally, you know, like network and help people. And so I think there's ways that you do that are high culture and high value. And there's ways to do that are very kind of cold and inconsiderate. And I think that's where you get to see, like, I'm a basketball fan. So I watch like when the Warriors go through like hard times. I'm a Golden State Warrior fan because of their organizational culture, right? Like I'm a fan of culture. And so like when they go through hardships, how do they respond versus how other teams go through hardships, and how do they respond? And I think that's the test. That's the rubber meets the road moment.
You bring up the NBA. I have to imagine they are infusing a lot of these qualities into their franchises, or rather the franchises may be doing it. I think about somebody like Steve Kerr. Oh my God. I mean, he's walking the talk, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That whole organization, like my dream, if anybody from the Golden State Warriors is listening, my dream would be able to do a culture, a research, and like a white paper on the secret sauce that I believe is their competitive advantage over the last 10 years, which is culture. And I imagine they wouldn't want me to do it until they've moved on to a different thing, but because I'd be giving away secrets. But there's a way in which they've established, like organization-wide, a kind of culture that is one that it really is based on like continuous growth and really diffusing dramas that can happen when you have a lot of big egos in the room. They're getting paid millions of dollars. That tends to bring with it a lot of big egos clashing, and they've been able to diffuse that in such a beautiful way. It's inspiring, really.
One of our past guests on What's Your Work Fit is Billy Howard, and she is the CEO of a company called Brandthrow, which I'm going to put my own spin on it. They do really deep dive research for companies and their brands, but one of the unique value propositions that they bring to it is emotionality. How do emotions play into how our brands are accepted or embraced versus how they may be a threat or a turnoff to some people? And what Billy got me really excited about is that a lot of these processes which impact how a brand sells lipstick also impact how they hire and retain really tremendous people, wonderful people, great citizens to join their brand and help scale it. And I'm wondering how externalities like events in the world, things that trigger people, being able to work for a brand that stands for really good things in the community as a global player, how important does that become to building culture in an organization?
You know, I think, you know, at Evolution, so I work with a group of about 40 coaches, consultants, and partners who do work with like 300 different companies all over the world. And what we found is that there's these certain moments of these things that happen in the world. Like I remember in 2020, in June, in the George Floyd murder and the response to that. And there was just like this moment, right? This cultural zeitgeist of like, wow, what do we stand for right now? And there's just a lot of an awakening there. And you can name a lot of different moments, but like, I think how companies respond as leaders in their community really is both an opportunity to like really walk the talk of here's what we care about. And it's also a potential moment where like, oh, we missed, we had this moment to like really live our values in a public way. And we didn't say anything and we didn't do anything. So at Evolution, we're doing things like top 1% to the world, and like giving, where you take your top line revenue and you just take 1% and you give it away to causes. And we're carbon neutral, and we're, doing the things that we know how to do that like reinforce the values that we care about. Because we're not just doing this for PR. We actually care about the thing. We care about the communities in the world being a better place.
When we brought you on as a guest and I pre-interviewed you, one of the things that made me excited is that I think what you're trying to do and what you and Todd set out to do with your book aligns well with the work that I'm trying to do, which is to help people be in control of their work destiny, which is to say, making work a part of a wonderful day, doing other wonderful things, and not the all-consuming time suck that work traditionally has been, especially if you're commuting 2 hours each way from Santa Barbara to wherever. How important is it for a company leader to demonstrate an investment in each of their career professionals' daily lives to make sure that they're representing themselves well and that they're creating an environment and conditions whereby that person that they hired, that they invested in, can do their very best work and not be consumed by it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna take a step back and offer kind of a framework that we work with when we help leaders really cultivate better team and company cultures. And it's in Evolution, we call it I, we, and it, right? We talk about these 3 dimensions of work. Like there's the work, and that's the it, and the objective, measurable things, and the OKRs, and the strategy, and blah, blah, blah. And then there's the we, which is our interpersonal interactions and culture. And then there's I, it's like my behaviors, my values, my mindsets, my disposition toward growth. And so one of the things that we find I think the challenge is, how do you get this ideal or these aspirations around culture or who we want to be together to be something that feels authentic and has traction versus just words on a page. And so when we work with leaders, we're actually helping them go like, okay, if these are our stated values, if we value, like there was a time during LinkedIn's early days, I've worked with a number of ex-LinkedIn leaders at other companies, and they tell these stories about the 2010 to 2013. There was this period when Jeff Weiner was really scaling up LinkedIn into what it was to become. And one of their values was transformation of our business, of our systems, human transformation, personal transformation, career transformation. They were all about transforming people's careers. And so 2 things that happened in that is that instead of just being like, oh, we're going to be about transformation and then putting it down and getting on with business, they were like, no, we're going to have everybody on the leadership team get coached. And every person, like there was a period at LinkedIn when you could go and every leader on that team had a authentic, true, transformational leadership story that they would tell you that affected not only the trajectory of their own career, but their personal life. And people would go, wow, that's a person who really values learning and growth, and they were vulnerable, and I want to be more like that. Wow. And then not only did they do that, but the global sales team took it to another level. They said, if you want to be considered for a promotion in our global sales team at anything above the director level, you have to have transformed the trajectory of somebody's career, right? And simple, right? Like, how do you do that? But what that means is they had to have a letter of recommendation from one of their team members that they transformed the trajectory of their career through their coaching and through their leadership. And so they just put teeth behind their values and made it like, we actually mean what we say here, and we're going to embed that in different parts of our business, and particularly how we evaluate performance of high-level leaders.
Amina Moreau was our guest from last week, and she's been commenting along the way here as you've been talking. And she said something last week that I think aligns with what you're saying about LinkedIn, which is when it first started. And by the way, I was one of the first people on LinkedIn because I was an executive recruiter. I needed this tool. It was highly utilitarian. But what she said, and I apologize, Amina, if I'm mangling. It's been 7 days, so if I get the words wrong, but the essence right. They infused a kind of a humanity to it, which allowed creators like Dan here to express a nobler purpose to this community called LinkedIn. So we're not just resume jockeys anymore. We're putting out our best selves. We're telling stories, and we are valuing, I'm speaking in LinkedIn terms now, creators. They consider me a creator because here I am on LinkedIn. I got this TV show. Yeah. That was never part of the vision when we started off in 2004 or whatever, as one of the first people on LinkedIn. And I've got to tell you, whatever they did has paid huge dividends.
Right.
Because this is my tribe now. This is where I talk to the most people. And it makes sense. We're all thinking about careers. We're all thinking about making ourselves and our conditions and our communities better.
Yeah.
So I appreciate.
I love what you're saying, because you're like, right, even in what you're saying is the thing that I think is the thread throughout this whole conversation, which is, yes, we're our resumes, we have career trajectories, we have jobs and roles, but we're also people. We're also humans. And I think all the different ways I'm inspired by all the different ways companies can reinforce that we're humans in a work experience, and that we want to be able to bring kind of more of ourselves. We spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week in this place of our lives, of the best time of the day for our energy. How do we make room for that? Like at Slack, we worked with Slack from the early days when there were 150 people, and all the way up through kind of IPO, coached them, worked with them on their culture. And they had this sign in one of their hallways that said, they had these like sayings, and one of them was, pretend that you're human. And I loved that little instruction, right? Because every time I walked by it, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm human. Like it's okay to bring humanness in it. In our company, we do check-ins at beginning of meetings, beginning of retreats, beginning of even short ones with our clients. And one of our kind of primary check-in prompts is, what's it like to be you right now? Just like in a sentence or two. And it just gives us that moment of human connection before we get into the work, and we can feel connected. And this is even more important on Zoom. Like so much of this is remote first now. And so like here, you and I'm over here, you're over there.
Right.
We're having this conversation. And yet a lot of the times when we're in big meetings, people are multitasking. We're not actually present.
Right.
And I remember, I'll just tell one more quick story. And I was working with Genentech and as part of their commercial organization. And I noticed that I'm in this meeting, and everybody's really present. And I was kind of, it didn't go unnoticed, because I'm not used to so many people being present, and nobody was multitasking. There was engaged conversation. People were like leaning in. I was like, how do you do this? And I commented on it afterwards, because I was there to facilitate the next section. And they said, in this part of the company, if you're multitasking at a meeting, the perception people have of you is that you're not able to manage your work or delegate from a leadership perspective in such a way that you can be present at meetings. We have a high value on being present at meetings. And if you're not present for meetings, that's not good for your brand. And I was like, that's a cultural statement.
Yeah, but I would agree with your statement, and I also know that's a 180 shift from the way it was when I was in the boardroom working at an ad agency. They expected you to be the plate spinner, having a bunch of plates in the air spinning.
Right.
But now it's different, and I think that's a good thing. To the audience, unfortunately, I had to do a little bit of multitasking to produce this show live today. So, but I've been listening to Simon intently. Simon, this has been
I
brilliant.
didn't notice.
I thank you so much for being on the show today. And before we get to our last question, I'm hoping that you can point our listeners and our viewers to where they can find you in social media, and perhaps most importantly, where they can get a copy of Scale Without Losing Your Soul.
Beautiful. All right. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's the main place I am as well. So you can find me there, Simon Darcy. And then you can find the book at www.scalewithoutlosingyoursoul.com. You can get a free chapter of the book. You can find a link to order the book. It's also on Amazon. It's also on Kindle. And also on that website is a follow-up resources. So actual like worksheets and guides for certain deeper processes that are highlighted in the book.
I marvel at how you read it. I read through it. It cut like butter. It was fast. It was impactful. A lot of books are written are so verbose, and you don't remember what the beginning of the chapter was. And I give kudos to you and Todd for just writing a book that creates a lot of positivity and actionability. So
Thank
bravo,
you. I appreciate
bravo.
you saying that, because I was a little like feeling insecure that it was only 160 pages. And then someone told me, it said, no, you're just writing the stuff that people want to read, and you're leaving out the other 200 pages that diffuse it. And I'm like, okay.
My book is this thin. My book from 12 years ago. More is not necessarily better. I think that the way you've written this book, again, I use the term actionable. I can take what you were saying to me, and I can put it into immediate practice. So bravo to you guys for really writing a splendid book. Okay, let's get to the final question. And I ask this of all my guests, which is, what's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a part of your day, doing many meaningful things and not just the day? What's your work fit, Simon?
All right. I thought about this because you told me it was coming. And so for me, the number one thing is, am I working? It's who I work with. It's two things. Am I working with a group of humans where we are all explicitly growing together? That growth and learning and development are of one of the highest values, and that it's a feedback-rich environment, that there's receptivity to feedback, that there's feedback offered, that there's celebration of growth and expansion. So I think that's one. Two would be, I really actually love the novelty of new clients and new opportunities and new groups. And so novelty, something that creates adventure, is going to be important to me. And then the third thing would be community. I need to feel a sense of connection with the people I spend so much time with. So,
oh man, I really resonate with community, and also being with new people. I used to be on new business pitches, and there was something really wonderful about that maybe you, Simon, could impact. I mean, the reason why they're in the room, and maybe you're going to turn whatever pain they have into something really wonderful. And it sounds like you have definitely done that. So thank you so much for that. I hope we can get you back on the show at some future point.
That would be fine. That would be lovely. Enjoyed this, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
All right.